So good morning and welcome everyone to an amazing day of Covenant of the Goddesses annual Leadership Institute. Every year as part of our Grand Council, which is our big business meeting, we have something called Leadership Institute, which is a day spent working on subjects to train our clergy. And this year, because our Grand Council was online last weekend, we decided to have Leadership Institute the following week so that more people could attend, because it's usually on a Thursday or a Friday. So this year it's today, and I want to thank you all for being here. I am the current National First Officer of Covenant of the Goddess, and I would like to thank everyone from Cherry Hill Seminary for presenting this Leadership Institute today. We were put in touch with you by one of our members, Maka, who I think is signed up here today. And Holly and I have been exchanging emails back and forth, setting this up. And I know it's going to be a wonderful program. Thank you all for being here. And then is Margo on yet, Holly? Or do I need to talk a little more?
Here she is.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to turn you over to Margo Wolfe, who is the academic dean of Cherry Hill Seminary. So thank you again.
Thank you. Good morning. And if y'all give me just a minute here to do the tech part. My name is Holli Emore. I'm Cherry Hill Seminary director. And we're very excited by this opportunity. We really appreciate it and are grateful that our own students are able to attend today as well. And some will receive credit. So Margo, I'm spotlighting you at this time. I want to introduce our academic dean, Margo Wolfe, who has helped put this together. And Margo, would you like to welcome people before we start on the panel?
Sure, thank you very much. Good to see everyone today. Thank you so much for this opportunity to present this day of panel discussions for Covenant of the Goddess, and again for also our students to be able to listen in as well. Thank you.
So would you like to introduce the first panel?
Sure will. Let me pull up my notes real quick. Okay. So our first panel consists of Holli Emore, MDiv, Director of Cherry Hill Seminary. Cedar Monroe, MDiv, co-founder of Chaplains on the Harbor for people experiencing homelessness, incarceration, and addiction, and of Harbor Roots Farm. Jeffrey Keefer, PhD, is the educational consultant and eco-mindfulness guide, chair of the Seminary Board of Directors. And Cynthia, I'm so sorry, I always mispronounce your name, so I apologize. Cebuhar, MDiv, co-director of Temple of the Creative Flame in Arizona, and resident clergy for Interfaith and Earth Traditions of Shrine of Holy Wisdom. All right, get my questions up for you. I'm working off of two devices. I appreciate your patience. All right.
Good morning, Cedar and Jeffrey. Good to see you. You might want to unmute yourselves now. And everybody else, if you'll keep yourself muted, we appreciate that.
I apologize.
Would you like me to get us rolling?
Could you? I opened it up and then it closed on me.
Well, this first panel is multiple religious identities as the new norm. And I think as pagans, we're pretty accustomed to being very fluid and multi-everything. So we thought this was a good chance to talk about this because a lot of our folks are from groups or families that have blended spiritualities or multiple spiritualities in a family. And this is something that's coming up more and more. Although Pew Forum thinks that this is a small number of people, it does note in a survey a few years ago that 15% of young adults who say they were raised in a more than one religious family do identify themselves that way. And 15% is certainly not a majority, but it's a lot of people. And we know that pagans probably are way more represented that way. So the first question is, in what forms have you encountered, and we'll abbreviate this today, MRI for multiple religious identities, not for the medical test, okay? And Jeffrey, I wonder if you want to start with, in what forms have you encountered MRIs in your spiritual service?
Thank you for this invitation, Holly. This is really exciting to be able to speak a little bit about this. I work in a number of different areas, being primarily a consultant. I work with a lot of nonprofit and higher education institutions, and I do some chaplaincy work at New York University. And it's really interesting, Holly, that concept of MRIs and multiple religious identities, because I'm seeing it more and more. It's very, very, it's almost in the air. And I think about many, many years ago when I was Catholic, one of the terms, it's many, many years ago, one of the terms that was often used was cafeteria Catholic. And some people here may have heard that, which is we take a little bit of here and there of what works for us, and we kind of like just leave the rest of it there. And that image is something that I'm really noticing in many, many ways, whether people are saying that they're Methodist, let's say, but they're also Buddhist, or people are saying that they may be Presbyterian, but they're also bringing in a whole lot of nature religion. And what I'm starting to really notice from this perspective, whether it's referring to any of the pagan traditions or nature-based spiritualities, that so much of it is really what we would refer to as pagans. I'm Druid in my own practices. We would refer to it as paganism without calling it that. And the multiple aspects, whether people are still holding on to a sense of born and grew up Christianity, and they just don't want to leave that alone, or they still want to have some sort of an identity, or some of the pagan perspectives may be a little scary to actually talk about, but the practices are there. And that's something which is really, I see that in all of the work that I do, whether it's pagan specific work or it is interspiritual work, that multiple identities is alive and well. And often, to your point, I think it might not be as readily acknowledged because I don't think that people really necessarily name themselves that way. In the same way that spiritual but not religious is very, very prevalent, but people don't normally think of themselves as, oh, that's what I'll put down when I go to the doctor's office and they ask for that if I'm preparing for a surgery. Oh, I'm spiritual but not religious. Most people wouldn't put that down, but that doesn't mean that it's that those perspectives aren't very much alive within the various populations.
No, you make a good point, and we don't have to dwell on this, but it seems to me that SBNR, of course, came from surveys, national surveys, and MRI is not on those surveys. So people have gotten acquainted with that term and use it, but they may not think to use the term MRI. Mm-hmm. Cedar, do you have some thoughts?
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to, I just want to acknowledge what Maka says in the comments, that it's an obscene hour of a Saturday morning because I'm on the West Coast, and so it's 7 a.m. over here. So along with, I'm sure, many of you. So yes, it is a bit early. So I might be stumbling about a bit. I think I wanted to start a little bit about myself, only because it's relevant. I have held multiple religious identities throughout my life. So I was raised in Christian fundamentalism, and I know many pagans that were. And when I became an adult, I left those circles and I studied a lot of different religions. I studied Judaism, I studied Islam, I thought about, I kind of turned atheist for a bit. But I also found progressive Christian circles and paganism. And for myself, I had become a member of an Episcopal church and also was practicing Druidry. But I wanted to go into ministry and get ordained. And so I stayed in the Episcopal church, and I went to seminary and got ordained. In the Episcopal church, kind of practiced multiple religious identities there for some time, and considered myself both Christian and pagan. And in my work, so I got ordained in the Episcopal Church, but most of what I did in my work was I did interfaith chaplaincy. And so my own religious identity didn't actually matter a whole lot in my work. I think it mattered most in the sense that most of the people I worked alongside, so I founded a ministry that in rural Washington state, for people experiencing addiction and homelessness and incarceration. So I did jail and prison chaplaincy, and also just kind of accompanied people, however, and supported people however they needed, and regardless of their faith tradition. So my role really was to support whatever people's religious traditions were, and it was interesting. Washington State, for those of you who are familiar with the Pacific Northwest, is the none zone. So more people identify with no religious tradition than any other religious tradition in this region. And that goes actually for even the more conservative rural areas as well. There were a lot of people who were raised Christian or raised Catholic, but may practice kind of a hodgepodge of different religious traditions. Some of them were both pagan and Christian. Some of them, had converted to Buddhism. There were some Muslims, a lot of folks practicing native spirituality, often in tandem with other religious traditions as well. And so I think in my work, among folks who were in and out of jail and prison, and also like super poor people in the United States and in the Pacific Northwest, it was really common to see multiple religious identities like this. And I'll talk more about my own journey in the next question about how I kind of just started identifying solely as pagan. But I think that that's something that's really important to see, like this kind of trend toward multiple religious identities really happens across a lot of different demographics. So I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much. Holly, you ready for me to jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
Great. Cynthia, did you want to add your comments as well?
I see you working on unmuting. There you go.
It went. If you could give me a restatement of the question, please.
Or in what forms have you encountered multiple religious traditions in your, got two windows, in your spiritual service?
Okay. I have always had an interfaith orientation, being raised Christian in a military family kind of situation as a Methodist, and my own development through Christianity as a Sister of Mercy, and then also leaving that for family life and where I am now. I've been married 40 years, and 25 of those have been in blessed pagan service. In my ministry, I'm involved with various identities, and it's been very beneficial for me to be seen and heard as a pagan. And I guess personally, I've just had a blessed, journey with all this, because there's been acceptance. People have been quite open with their personal beliefs, and we find commonality and we go forward. And when there's disagreements, we take the time to work with that. So in my own life, I was raised that way, raised to question, raised to respect. And in my family, there's all sorts of situations for various religious identities. In the community and ministry, I've worked with quite a few of the Indigenous communities here in the Phoenix area. And oftentimes I've had healthcare chaplains reach out to me because they have a patient in those situations. And I have resources that I can pull from and put them in touch with. So it's enlarged the circle of acquaintanceship with multiple religious identities. And it's been a wonderful journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Holly, would you like to weigh in on multiple religious identities in your work?
Well, I will say that I gave the sermon at the Charleston Unitarian Church last week. That's their title. And afterwards, of course, people always talk to me, and they wanted to hear about Cherry Hill. So talked about the seminary and some of our stories. And afterwards, people said, I don't know why there's not a CUPS group here anymore. There was for a long time. And there's a whole story with that. But I said, well, it's all volunteers, so leadership is hard. And they said, I think that's the reason we don't have anybody right now. And then a lady leaned over and she said, but a good many of these people are actually pagan. And of course, when you are a Unitarian Universalist, it's easy to say I'm a UU pagan, but not everybody seems to have that luxury. And I'm thinking that it occurs to me this morning that, Jeffrey mentioned cafeteria Catholicism. Well, if you've been through or come out of a more fundamentalist branch of your religion, of course, in America, that's usually Christianity, then you don't think of that as an option. You think of it as either or, true or false. So I think it's refreshing and interesting to me to see people who can go to the cafeteria and pick out what's best for them to eat.
Thank you so much, Holly. I believe we got through everyone, yes?
Yes.
Fantastic. All right, so our next question is, in terms of multiple religious identities, do you often find them to be either well-defined, are they in flux, or are they always changing? And let's switch it up a little bit, and we'll start off with Cedar.
Yeah. So for myself, I have found it pretty in flux often for myself, right? So there was certainly a time where I was ordained in the Episcopal Church for 10 years, and I resigned my orders last year after several years of discernment. So for me, my own path took me towards identifying solely as pagan. Like I didn't find I didn't continue to find the support and kind of religious identity in the church. That just didn't continue for me. And I think everyone's story is different, though. I think that with folks that I've worked with as a chaplain, but also just and at large, I think that we're in a time of really great religious flux. I think in 1971, I think somewhere around 90% of Americans identified as Christian, and I think it's somewhere around 66% now. And the numbers are steeply declining among young people, particularly. I think young people are also often identifying with multiple religious identities. I think for some people, staying with the traditions that they grew up with and adding other traditions feels really comfortable. And for some people, maybe especially those of us who have a background in fundamentalist versions of faith, especially Christianity here in the US, I think that it can be really liberating to make a full break. So I think everybody is finding their own way right now, and it's both. I think of it as both, like it's both a very individual path. Everybody has their own path, and it's also part of this much larger cultural shift that we're in the middle of.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think a lot of people have been recognizing that as we're starting to see the cultural shift here in the United States and having more of that opportunity to explore. Thank you. Cynthia.
As I said, my background was Christianity for many years, and I became Catholic searching for community. And so all through my progression to the place I am now has been a journey of finding community, being community, developing community, growing community. Because by tradition, my basic practice is earth-based, which is this huge universal community. And that's one of the reasons that I'm at home with various organizations and their spirituality, because I find commonality. My devotion to prayer and altar service grew out of my service in Christian community. And my developing theology came from having to understand what is and what isn't for myself. And it's been a wonderful journey. It truly has been difficult at times, but it's this broadening of scope of practice and insight that multiple religious experiences bring to me. And I'm grateful for that.
Thank you, Cynthia. I think that's a beautiful way of thinking it, right? That it's a gift to have those merge and having that ability to explore. Holli, I'll jump to you.
Well, I noticed that Deborah Bender put a couple of comments in the chat box that people who are raised Jewish or born Jewish don't tend to leave that identity behind. And that's another factor I've put a lot of thought into. I realized that a lot of the reason people stick with whatever religion they grew up with is because that's their culture. So I found a number of times in recent years, if I'm talking with Jewish friends and they're trying to explain what they are and aren't, and I say, well, you're culturally Jewish, right? In fact, I said this to a Turkish doctor I have recently. He said, you mean you're culturally Muslim? And he said, that's right. I don't really practice, but yeah, that's the way I grew up. So that's helped me have more respect for people holding on to those identities that I feel I'd left behind or disagreed with. It doesn't really matter what I think anyway, but it helps me understand why somebody continues to go to church with their partner or want their kids to go to somebody's Sunday or Sabbath school or something like that. So yeah, that's my thought.
Thank you, Holli. And yes, thank you, Deborah, for bringing that up. Even in my small community and the Jewish community that we have here, there's a whole line of people in one of the pews that are pagan and Jewish. And because they felt that connection when they were a child, they did not want to leave that component behind. Thank you. Jeffrey.
It was interesting when you had mentioned about this cultural sense of religion. And as I mentioned just before, I was Catholic many years ago. I'm no longer Catholic or Christian, certainly by any stretch of the imagination. Though the really connecting with that, it was a month ago. I found myself going to Lourdes for the first time. The enormous, larger than life, almost Catholic shrine in the south of France. I'd always had a fascination with it, and I couldn't help but wonder while I was there, which was kind of like a Catholic amusement park in many ways, to see fully habited nuns carrying gallons of holy water. Anyway, it's something to see. But anyway, when I was there, it's like as we were getting ready to leave, it was like, oh, I've got to get holy water, right? But I haven't used holy water in 20 years, 30 years, but I get somehow I need to have it, right? That's but it connects us in many ways. And it's interesting in France, where most of the churches are actually owned by the nation. They're actually owned by the government. Certainly the older ones, which has a certain level of complexity because the churches are empty. Otherwise, they're really from a multiple religious identity. The French are really a poster child of what I think in many ways the U.S. And even Canada might be looking at moving forward with these. But going back to your question, Margo, I think that in flux and always changing. How many people that I work with that will still define themselves in one way, even though there's very little in their life that would provide evidence for that. But that's a term that they're comfortable with. It's kind of like, well, what term do you want to use to describe yourself, to put yourself in a box that I'm this? We think about that, with what career we do. I want to, I need to feel comfortable in saying that I'm this or I'm that, whether it's in relationship or certainly your spiritual or religious practices. And I think that those are long-term senses that we just need to be connected with something because it's comfortable for us, even though we might not be practicing anything that what it actually says or following the lines of religious practice. And some of the work that I do in related to the Wild Church Network is fascinating because it comes out of a Christian tradition. And some of the terminology that's used is still very Christian, and many of the people there are involved as various stripes of Christian pastors. However, you can't get any more pagan than the practices that they're doing, which are focused around connecting with the earth, connecting with nature, connecting with the spirits of water and the spirits of the land and the spirits of indigenous peoples and things like that. And it's just fascinating that I think that, along with what we're talking about here, is very, very timely for many people in our society and many in our cultures.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And if I could just piggyback on this question, a lot of people who are holding on to their faith from that they grew up with, they find a deep connection to that, and then they're adding to it or merging it. Do you see, either in your practice or in the work that you do, any conflict with any of those belief systems that might have maybe some conflicting ideas or practices, and how might somebody mitigate that? Give you a second to think about that. I just threw something at you. I apologize. Holli, can I jump to you for that?
So let me just clarify. Your question was about possible feelings of conflict.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. I think that probably goes back to what I shared earlier, that if we are looking for truth, I'm putting that in quotes, the truth, the only truth, then it's conflicts abound. If we're open to truth as a general dynamic of fluidness moving through our lives, then there's not. Now, I think Cynthia said you eventually, or maybe, I don't know, somebody said they joined a church primarily for the community. And that's a perfectly valid reason. If that community supports you and nourishes you and gives you what you need, then I think that's okay. But the reason I bring that up is because the other people in your community might perceive a conflict and be confused, or you to identify. And then that might disrupt the balance of the community. And I wonder how we would explore those factors and turn that into a positive instead of a disruptive force.
Thank you. Trying to see. I moved shifted the panel around, so now I'm trying to remember who I haven't talked to yet. Cedar, do you have any thoughts on that?
This question of conflict. I mean, I think, I think that I really I really am thinking a lot about what Cynthia said about how much our religious identity is bound up in our relationships and in the communities we form. And I think that that is the way that kind of naturally allows us to form multiple religious identities, and kind of hold those realities and those different, maybe different belief systems, like in tension. I mean, it is harder, of course, in more fundamentalist versions of Christianity. But I think for myself, the pushback that I would occasionally get pushback in the community for, maybe during a funeral or during a public ritual of some sort, using multiple religious expressions. Sometimes there'll be pushback. It certainly was uncommon in a relatively conservative community to do that. But we also found a lot of ways to include, if we did a blessing of land, to include multiple traditions, or or in funerals to acknowledge the religious tradition of like multiple parts of the family. So I don't know. I think yes, there's conflict, and yes, there's always ways to hold those two things in tension.
Thank you so much. Jeffrey?
When you asked that question, Margo, what immediately sprang to my mind are, what are the social issues that really are quite contentious, especially in the US right now, even issues that seem to have been settled, right? I mean, abortion and gay marriage and, racial ethnic things, and you could go right down the list, of issues that in many ways seem to be resolving, but have been or actively being upended in many ways. And I think that pagans of whatever kind of stripe we're not immune from that. And we don't live in separate worlds from that. We're part of that. Those are the issues that even when we try to not look at the news or try to separate ourselves from conversations at the supermarket or whatever, these issues are there. And in many ways, for those of us who are not only seeking to practice our own belief system or implement these multiple perspectives that we live in many ways, so are the people that we minister to, so are the people that we work with, where we try to hold space even when people can't really explain difficulties that they're having, where something seems to be like this, but they feel differently, but there are all sorts of pressures that are out there to silence people from really speaking about that, for good reasons and not so good reasons at times. But this is the reality that we live in, and holding space in very difficult times for people who we might on the surface say, well, of course they're going to, come down on this side or think about it from this perspective. But once again, we're not immune from some of the challenges that we face, where we have often inconsistencies in our own beliefs and practices, just like people who will really hold on to some of these traditions and say, well, it needs to be like this. So I think that your question is wonderful. Talk about a question for a thesis. So
a good direction for any of our students that are listening and preparing for that process. Thank you, Jeffrey. Cynthia.
Well, working and living in those types of spaces, walking in the world as a pagan, with the culture that we're in, has made me stronger in myself. It's given me the voice to clearly articulate what my beliefs and practices are. And it's reaching across the table and shaking hands and saying, hi, this is me. This is what I have. Can I give you more salad or more dessert if we're at this long buffet? You know, we're in service to each other. I'm in service to myself and how I deal with the divine and my relationship. But I'm also in service to you to lift you up in ways that encourage you to be the best that you are, regardless of your tradition. And it's interesting to watch the process of transformation of relationship, because I might be the only witch that they really know in their lives. But yet I'm here, I'm showing up, I'm doing the work. How can we help each other moving forward? I was at an event and a little boy came up to me and said, Mama said you have horns. I said, oh, did you want to feel? Why don't you check? And he ran his little fingers all through my hair. And he turned around. He must have been 7 or 8. He said, Mama, there's no horns. And she was just beside herself. So
Yeah.
But what a living witness, right? That child he was his own John the Baptist, expounding in the wilderness of this sea of people of what was true. And it was a pagan truth. It was something he could see, feel, touch, engage with in a positive way. So it's those types of things that stand out in my mind, that they're graphic examples of who we are. And I can say all the words I want, but it's those types of encounters that speak the loudest, I think, to a community.
Thank you. And especially when you are in those spaces where there are multiple religious identities, whether they are amongst people or within people who are working through or working with multiple identities within themselves. Recognizing the commonalities there that we have, and also identifying those inconsistencies that are floating about, right? And even when you're looking at the logistics of anything, I think Maka put into the comments about developing ceremonies and funerals and weddings and so forth that bring a lot of those traditions together, and showing the beauty of those weavings is a great thing. But sometimes you do have those areas where somebody might feel a conflict when they hear something or see something, and then how that can be mitigated. So that's a beautiful example. Thank you, Cynthia. Let's see, let's go on to our next question here, which is when you're talking about multiple religious identities, is this a tradition away from a previous religion or a new way of approaching one's spirituality? And I think a lot of you touched on that, but is it something we can expand on in terms of whether it's something you have worked through, or that you have seen within your practice? And we'll start with you, Holli.
Okay. Long before I'd ever heard of paganism, I was doing consulting for the Episcopal Church, and I've shared this story with some of you. And one day we needed to stop our business meeting with the priest, and he said, I'm sorry, but I've got this 30-minute service every Wednesday. He said, it's really for the older members of the church, and I hope you don't mind, and you're welcome to come along if you want to. And the person with me was Jewish, but we went to the service, and I was sitting there, and it had been a long time since I was in a position to take communion. And I knew that these maybe 8 or 10 elderly women around me, that it would be really noticeable if I didn't go forward. And so I felt a real dilemma, and I ran around to I think you call it the sacristy, where you get robed. And the priest was in there, and this is a really cool dude. And I said, Donald, I need to ask you something. He looked around, and I said, if I take communion, will you think I'm drinking damnation unto myself? Which is a scripture quote. And his eyes got really big. I said, I don't want to offend anybody by taking it or not taking it. He said, I think the real question is, will you feel, will you, will you feel that you've drunk damnation unto yourself? And I said, no. And he said, then I don't care. Everybody's welcome here. So I got really lucky that the first time I kind of confronted that divide, I was with somebody. But it just goes to show that I still had that deep conditioning not from years as an Episcopalian, but from my years as a fundamentalist, that that was embedded in me. But there's also things that I've been able to bring back into my life. Just being more open, going in interfaith. I have to go to other people's services. I sing their songs. Once in a while, I feel kind of nauseated and I don't want to. But most of the time, it's okay. But we'll talk more about that in the last panel this afternoon. So that's my story about the transition.
Thank you, Holli.
And may I say something? We forgot to say at the beginning that if you have questions for a panelist or all of our panelists, excuse me, please put that in the chat box. We're trying to watch it. And then in a few minutes, we can have some discussion.
Thank you, Holli. Jeffrey, do you have any comments on this?
Your question, which you shared, which focused about transitioning away from previous religions or really kind of like building something from scratch. I would say that from my experience, a lot of it is age based. So in general, from what I found, people who are a little bit older have grown up in some tradition that then they choose to follow or reject or adapt to their own perspective. But in the same way that even as Cedar had mentioned earlier, with the changing demographics on what percentage of Christianity, since the U.S. has generally been more Christian than anything else, while that number is declining, we're seeing that in younger people who grow up without having a tradition. So one person that I was accompanying, we found ourselves in an old church, and the person went in. I said, well, I'm going in because I'm always looking for statues and I like the old smells and blah blah blah. And the person went in there, had no idea what to do. They didn't have any idea. They didn't know who any of the people were. They didn't know what you were supposed to do with it. They didn't quite get candles or no candles. They just didn't get it. And in many ways, I think that that's what we're increasingly seeing. People who don't have traditions, they find themselves during periods of strife or periods of transition or periods of liminal spaces or whatever we have that mark some sort of a life transition or a life ritual, but they don't have a ritual. They don't have anything to fall back on. And in many ways, that then leads to that sense that, wow, I don't really have anything like this. And these people around me yelling about different traditions and whatnot, they don't really resonate with me. So I'm gonna look internally, or I'm gonna look to books, or I'm gonna look for things that somehow won't be scary, like some of these scary, very loud voices out there, because they just don't resonate. And many folks just don't quite have that background and or that baggage. So what I think, what I'm finding, at least, I can't say we, but what I'm finding at least are generally the younger people are, the more they're coming fresh without any background whatsoever. And for pagans, well, if you strip away some of the differences that might be between our different traditions, one of those similarities is nature and this reverence and connection with nature. And well, that's not scary. And in many ways, it's that connection with nature that then becomes the opening door, especially with the ecological disaster that we're facing. That becomes that open door to people really stepping in, and saying, "Wow, there is something that's a little bit beyond me," and that's both interesting as well as scary as well as inviting. So I hope Margo, I answered and at least addressed a little bit of your question there.
You did, thank you. And it actually will jump back into that idea in a moment with our next question. But I wanted to give Cynthia a chance to respond to that as well.
I'm getting lost in everyone's wonderful explanations. At the Shrine of Holy Wisdom, it's where I practice quite often. It's definitely an intertradition, interfaith space. I preach at some of the services. There is a policy of an open communion table, and it's interesting to see Hindus and people of Jewish persuasion going forward because they equate what's happening in front of them to some type of similar practice in their own tradition. And they're at home at that because no one's telling them you have to do it this way. You have to be baptized before you can do this. All are welcome. And so at times I've approached seeing the process of preparation that the priest is going through or priestess is going through. It's cakes and ale. I mean, it's that type of being at table with others, sharing something that's universal to all of us. We all have to eat. We all want to bless each other in one way or another. And it really hasn't been a conflict for me. But wherever I am, I try to find things that are underlying, the ideas that are underlying. And again, it's community, finding ways that we can be together. So, thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Our last question for the panel, and then we will open this up, is how do pagans fit in this new norm? And then how do we also accommodate multiple religious identities? And I know several of you have already touched on this, but is there any way that you want to expand on that? And we'll start at the top of my screen with Holli.
I've lost count now of the times that people have gotten to know me, and as we talked about our respective religions and lives and experience, they say, I guess I'm really a pagan. And I say, a rabbi friend, a lot of Episcopalians, they'll call themselves Episcopagans. But it's nice to me that people are finding what we have in common. And it seems to me that as pagans, we may sometimes miss out on that by being as tribal as we are sometimes. So, being a little more open, I think, would help us fit into a new norm. Whereas Cynthia said, all your experiences, and you really echoed what has been my experience, all my experiences at the Secret Wara, at the Muslim church that makes me sit on one side, and the mosque that makes me sit on the women's side, which I hate. And all of those experiences still increase my depth and ability to perceive the world through the eyes of, as they would say, spirit. So I think that it's up to us to open ourselves to fitting with this norm and to respect those that come into our circles or our ministry, so to speak, and respect the fact that they have these multiple identities.
Thank you, Holli. Cedar?
So I'm going to answer both questions. I think just I think that I'm going to talk a little bit about transition away from previous religions, just to highlight a couple of things that I have noticed, especially with younger people going towards paganism, is the role of queerness, the role of being. I think that for me has been a defining part of my own spiritual journey, my own queerness, my own transition as a trans person. I think there's an experience for many of us, especially those of us who were raised Christian and came out, um, is there's a forced break with culture of origin that often happens, right, for a lot of young people. Um, and I think that queerness plays a role in that. Um, and paganism often, I think, for many of us, is a tradition that allows us to be more fully ourselves. I know that one of the main reasons that I really completely switched religious identity from being Christian and pagan to just being pagan is the role of how the church talks about sexuality, even in really progressive traditions, and how I felt tolerated versus embraced. And so, I'm certainly not trying to paint all Christian traditions the same way and all people's experience the same way, but I do think that this is playing a large role in this shift in younger generations. And I mean, I think across generations, but certainly I think that this is part of the shift that we're seeing culturally. And my cat would like to say hello. But I do want to highlight that, and also the role of especially in white communities, understanding. I think there's a greater and greater understanding of the role of Christianity in colonization in this country. And I think that a lot of us are trying and working on deconstructing that, working on trying to decolonize how we think about religion. And I think that that's also facilitating. I've seen a couple of comments. I think that that is also part of the conversation. And in these religious shifts. I mean, I think that those are important things to highlight. Also, to talk about how pagans fit into this new norm, as I have found more and more home in paganism. I think all religious traditions can be closed. I've found pagan circles that are really open and supporting of my own religious identity, and I found others to be somewhat, closed and judgmental. I think that kind of being closed and judgmental is not just a Christian trait. It's something that any religious identity can participate in, and so I think that as pagans, more and more, as more and more people turn towards paganism, as more and more young people try to find a home in paganism, I think one of the things, at its best, paganism can really affirm people's own choice and can be a place to find community, and really a place where people can find a sense of reverence for the land. I think, Jeffrey, you talked about this kind of ecological crisis that we're in, and I think so many of us are trying to figure out what our relationship is with the other than human world. And I think paganism offers that. And also, I think working on finding space in pagan communities for these big questions for people with multiple religious identities, for people who are trying to find their space in the world, is something that we can all work on.
Thank you so much, Cedar. And yes, pulling in some of the the questions that are in the chat. Appreciate that very much. Jeffrey.
In this new norm and we've seen this in the chat about monotheistic religions. I would say it's not only monotheistic religions, but there are a number of different faith traditions that are focused on conversion. right? Because I got the right answer and you don't. So therefore, I have this obligation to bring you the right answer or force you to embrace the right answer. Because if I have the right answer and you don't have it, right, we got to fix that. In other words, I got to fix you. And pagans are generally not quite so focused on that orthodoxy, but even as Cedar had mentioned, there are exceptions, right? Right. There are various pagan traditions or aspects, comes and goes, about really focusing that, and I think that a lot of that is just because that's what's in the air. I mean, that's the political landscape right now. We got right and wrong, right? I'm on the right side, and therefore you're wrong. And so this is just out there in the culture. And I think that for pagans who generally don't proselytize, don't try to convert, don't go out and really talk up all of the good things that we're doing, in many ways that makes us more approachable. But that also comes with some challenges as well, because we can't just sit around and wait for people to find us, right? So these questions are very, very simple, Margo, sneaky Margo. There's such simple questions, but they're really, really challenging with responses, because we live in a very complicated society. And that's one of the things that I so value about opportunities like this, where we get to really talk about some of these issues from various perspectives, not trying to convince others of this, but just trying to share, this is what I've experienced. This is what I've experienced. What can we possibly gain from an understanding of this to then try to make the world a better place, which is what I think really most pagans are actually trying to do, from my experience. So, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Cynthia, your comments on how pagans factor into all of this.
Well, I don't like being left out of anything. So if there's a thing going on, I want to be part of it. I mean, yes, it's my ego, but I naturally want to be part of things. I like a challenge. I like growing. I like seeing things expand and becoming these wonderful ideas brought to life and put into practice. And it's a selfish thing. I want to see my tradition grow. I want to see ideas of nurturing the earth and harboring familiarity and not being afraid grow. And and if I'm in that, that's a wonderful thing as far as I'm concerned. And I think it's important for us to be present and to show up. Is it hard? Absolutely. Is it challenging? Absolutely. Do you get knocked on your keister once in a while? Yes. But you get up and you go forward in ministry. That's the challenge, isn't it? To take it up and to go forward and to work through those things that are presented as challenges for us, and to not be afraid. You have your community for support. Your community might be your family, might be your friends, however you define that for yourself. You pick yourself up and you move forward, and you just kind of get on with it. Maybe that's my mom coming out. Get on with it, move forward. Let's go. There are things to do in this world, and it's important to be present for that. I really believe that.
Thank you, Cynthia. We have 10 minutes left. Is that correct, Holly? We're going to
10 or 15. Yeah.
Okay.
So we started a little late.
Okay. So I'm going to pull some of the comments and questions from the chat. Lisa asked, it seems like one of the drawbacks of multi-religions, fluid religious practice, is that it's hard to find culture in it. Yes, we have the benefit of taking what we want and leaving the rest. In doing so, we might lose a sense of culture in our individualism. And I'm wondering what the panelists think about that. I will just open this up to whomever would like to respond to that one.
For myself, developing a family culture that's interfaith is the best. I'm borrowing another term, witness to the world that living this way is possible in healthy ways. And it's I mean, you know, the kids have always, since I've taken up this path, we have Yule, we have Christmas, yay! You know, we have the wheel of the year, and but we can show up for each other in other ways. All my kids are very independent in their paths that they've chosen, but yet they are able to explain to their world, the people that they engage with, this is how we do it, and it's worked, and it's helped their outlook to be more accepting of others, and hopefully a life lived that way is also able to show others that it's possible, you know. Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on that?
I see a couple of hands up, Valerie Hahn and Maka.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Maka, did you want to ask a question?
I wanted to make a comment, actually.
Go for it.
And I have actually a lot, and I'm going to only make one at a time because there's probably not a lot of time for anything. But one is community. Was Holli originally mentioned about that, which is something that I think we tend to lack as pagans. We don't have it in the same way as established institutions have. And I have to tell you about my background a little bit. I'm a product of what was known as a mixed marriage. My parents were married in the 30s. That's almost 100 years ago. So we're talking quite a trajectory and change. But they were both Christian. But it was my father was an Irish Catholic. My mother was from a long line of very uptight Methodist ministers. And and neither family went to the wedding. They were not married to the church. I mean, it was seriously a mixed marriage. There was a lot of hostility towards it. And I sort of managed. But of my Protestant relatives, who were all descended from these Methodist ministers, depending on where they lived, they belonged to different churches. One was Baptist, one was Episcopalian, one was Presbyterian. And I believe that has to do with the community they found in whatever church. The practices and beliefs were not that dissimilar. And so they found people that they had a resonance with, that they were the ones they wanted to hang with. And the label was not as important. And I don't think they felt they strayed very far. They weren't betraying how they were brought up. One other real quick thing I'm going to say is that, and we don't have it. We don't have those communities. There was just a post in San Francisco, a thing called the San Francisco Pagan Society, which is on Meetup, which has zero activity. I've been a member for years, and this post came through this week asking for where they could find particular Sabbath. I forget what the circumstances were, but anyway, I had to tell them that this is not the way we're organized. People practice in small, intimate groups. We didn't have necessarily. There are places certainly where we have public Sabbaths, but not everywhere. And you need a group to do that. And people are used to having this. It's not exactly a buffet, but they're used to have choices. They can go to this church or that church, and they can, share their practice with them. We don't offer that. Jeffrey mentioned, and somebody mentioned, maybe it wasn't them. We won't wait. We can't wait for people to find us. I come from a really old school place where I think the quest is really very important, and I don't think we should be that easy to find. I think we should be visible. I think we should be helpful when we are approached, but I'm so anti proselytizing. It's really big for me. So that's something we encounter because we take from the overculture the idea that, oh, this is great, come do this with me, or I have the answers. And I don't feel that way about my paganism. So that's more than enough.
Thank you, Margo.
Thank
yeah,
you.
I mean, those are some, finding that middle ground of how to reach out to people without overly reaching out to people and so forth. We've got two Valeries that have their hands up. Valerie Langston, and I can't see your last name very well.
Valerie Hahn. Oh, sorry.
Valerie Hahn, do you want to go first? And we'll have Valerie Langston go right after you.
Sure, thank you. Reflecting on all of this, I have two comments that come from an appreciation for pagan history and an inquiry into pagan history and theology. And the first is that I had a dear friend who was on the pagan scene for a very long time who identified as a Christo-pagan. That was her religious identity, was Christo-pagan. And she was always shocked and dismayed at finding pagans who reacted against that there are no pagans telling her there's no such thing as a Christo-pagan, which is sort of like a reverse form of, it's like flipping the discrimination against her. It's like taking an idea from Christianity and then using it back against a pagan, which is contrary, in my view, to what paganism should be about. But I always thought about that because historically, there were many, many centuries when people would neither have identified as Christian or pagan. They would have just been practicing a mix of the two in Europe. And it was rooted out of them forcibly. So we're up against that idea that naturally people want to mix. They want to assimilate new ideas. They are naturally syncretistic. They're not naturally practitioners of orthodoxy until that is trained into them. And the same is true of Judaism. For many hundreds of years, they had to root out the polytheistic practices of the Jews in Israel, the prophetic mission to do that, because people naturally wanted to be syncretistic. So I like to emphasize to pagans that our natural state is actually multi-religious. That's what our natural tendency is to do, unless we're trained by something to have other views or to be the policing force of our religion. And the second point I wanted to make also comes from ancient religion, which I try to bring forward and use a guiding light for myself, but also in teaching, is that in ancient polytheism, people could travel and become initiates of different gods and goddesses who had different practices and different experiences to offer. And that was not a problem. That is part of our pagan heritage. So I like to invite people to embrace that sense of appreciating and even participating and even becoming initiated into different cults, different religious cults, different forms of worship. And I also like to really present that as part of my pagan identity when I show up in interfaith, is that I'm a polytheist. I'm good with your God. Can I get the same? I'm good with your form of worship. This is a beautiful and expanding experience for me. I have no problem doing that. Can you meet me across the aisle in expanding your view of what religious pursuit is beyond just having to be nailed into one religion? So that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. I just want to give the panelists any room to, if you wanted to comment or a question or anything in response to either Valerie or Maka's comments.
I did have just a quick comment that I was reading last night in a book that I put on our reading list. It's called Leaving the Fold. And the writer points out that fundamentalists have a shared language and culture, so they can pick up and go anywhere and be part and belong, wherever they show up, because there's usually other people like them there. We sometimes have that, most of the time not. That's all.
Good point. Thank you. Cynthia, did you have something?
I appreciate what Valerie was saying about reaching across the table and meeting me halfway and mutual respect. It's so very important. At an Earth event I was at, we were cleaning a field, and a few of us who are pagans were visibly upset by the trash, and there were tears and all. And I had a few people from other traditions ask, "Why are you crying?" And I was able to explain that. And at the end of that, there were a few tears in their eyes also. So it's being present that's so important. Thank you for your explanations, Valerie.
Thank you, Cynthia. We've got another hand up. Valerie Langston Bretillo. Bretillo, am I pronouncing it correctly? Okay, thank you, Valerie. Go ahead.
Yes, it's Italian. You did it correct. So what came up for me was my reminder of a point in my journey as a finding my own pagan path and learning to, or being invited to separate that from my ministry. And that I was at an event where it was a repeated group of people, but we were around each other year after year. And so intimacy developed, but still none of us particularly, we weren't of the same religious tradition, but we talked about where we are. And so a conservative Christian was there, and she and I were in the choir together and valued singing together. And I had an experience that I would think is extremely common for this group, that she came over and had me be alone, and she let me know that she was sad that she wouldn't get to sing in heaven with me. And I said, yeah, I'm sad if I don't get to sing with you for a long time too. But it's okay that, I don't know exactly how I said, but it was clear. I tried to be clear that I know what I'm doing after death, or I know what I believe is happening after that, but it's not the same as you. And she said, well, what about your relationship with Jesus? And I said, well, I've had a relationship with Jesus a long time. Jesus and I are good, but that's not the practices. So that was very upsetting. And, I kept my cool and I was proud about that. But afterwards, there was lots of crying. I feel like crying now. It was, all the painful part. And what came from it, though, was a gratitude that I knew at least enough to get myself through it. But then I thought about all the other people, and like young queer people, let's say, that have had that said, and that they have no idea what to say. And so that has become a big part of my ministry, is hearing when people need support on how to talk about religion with people that, our culture has all the language related to Christian or monotheism. And so I think that means that they are able to have that conversation quickly, and then that stumps people. And so that it's been helpful for me to separate out my pain, my fear of my relationship with my parents, how to talk about that what are the things that pagans can say professionally, and that helped me let go of having to know it all and be able to talk about my whole big process. That's not necessary or helpful. So thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. We have just do a quick wrap up with all of our panelists. Anything that you wanted to comment on, whether the questions or the comments that were presented, or anything else that you want to say in regard to multiple religious identities. And we'll start with Holly at the top of my screen.
I've loved this conversation. I don't have anything to add, but this has been a rich hour, so thank you.
Thank you. Cedar?
I just wanted to say really quickly that I resonate, Valerie, with your experience. I'm estranged from my family of origin. not just or even primarily because of religious identity, but as a queer person, as a trans person, and there's a lot of pain in that. And that's that's part of, I think that's part of what's difficult in multiple across traditions and having multiple religious identities, or participating. Obviously, Christianity is the dominant religion still, and in some ways we're not always it's not always a choice to to kind of be in those spaces. It's just kind of the air we breathe in this country. And so yeah, there can be a lot of pain in that. One thing that kept coming to me in this conversation is, I think, Valerie Hahn, you talked about how syncretism is and was, especially in traditional societies, in pre-Christian societies, kind of more the norm. And I think I've been thinking a lot about how Western culture and culture in the US were both incredibly individualistic. And of course, that plays out into how we experience multiple religious identities. But also, we also in the United States, particularly in this stage, we live in a culture that has tended to create community around right belief. I mean, I'm not saying everyone does that or all religious communities do that. There's certainly trends away from that right now, which is great. But also that has been the tendency. And it's really hard. I think it certainly is the tendency in dominant Western white culture. And I think that is one of the things that for many of us who are either multiply identified or in pagan circles are really trying to figure out and kind of trying to develop skill for how do we create community differently. And I think we're in a place in our culture where we don't know how exactly, and we're just trying to figure it out.
Thank you very much, Cedar. Jeffrey.
It was interesting. I haven't told anybody here this story. It was a couple of weeks ago. I'm in upstate New York right now. We had our septic pumped, as one of the lovely things that those of us who don't live in cities all the time get to have. And afterwards, the fellow who did it said, he said, would you mind if I prayed for you? I'm thinking, sure, I could use all of the divine inspiration or anything that anybody wants to give. What I didn't know is he wanted to do it like right there. Which was, it's been a long time since somebody's taken my hand and prayed to Lord God for things. And so I'm thinking this, and I guess it goes back to my spiritual direction training. It's like, okay, for whatever reason, this person needed to do this. So let me just hold space. And I found myself almost like disembodied listening to this just because it's not a normal not a frequent experience, shall we say, when this happens with somebody who I've never met before. And I found myself coming back to something that I read a number of years ago in that book that some of you might have read, the Four Agreements. And one of them, which really kind of resonated for me at that moment, is don't take things personally. Right? Because it's not about me. It's about this person, right? This individual has whatever issues that are going on. It's about them, right? They have this need to pray with me. I don't, but they have this need. So it's not necessarily something that I need to kind of like struggle with, or I need to feel bad about or go seeking whatever, though of course those things happen. But in many ways, being pagan is about realizing when people don't accept us, which I think many of us have likely had that experience, that it's not about me, right? It's not, I'm not forcing anything on anybody. I'm kind of like living my own life. But it's often about the needs, the challenges, the conflicts that other people have. And as many of us here are involved in various kinds of ministries, often to people who are not like us, whatever that might be, that is some of that's kind of like always out there in the ether, right? And how we hold space for people who don't know how to do that for us is something that comes through a lot of practice, a lot of experience, a lot of journaling and taking time with ourselves to really get comfortable in our own beliefs, even when our beliefs continue to evolve and shift as the beliefs of many of the people around us. And I think that even having these kinds of conversations is so incredibly valuable, because we're not looking for the answer. We're looking for sharing our experiences, because someplace in that somebody might hear something that might be helpful for whatever needs we have right now, or the ones that we're going to be coming into really in our next steps, whatever they may be.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Cynthia.
I just want to encourage everyone who's present here that if you need support, there is so much wisdom here. Pay attention to the names, make notes. I've been writing people down, reach out, because it's incredible the amount of support that all of us are willing to help, even if it's just a listening ear. So don't be afraid, reach out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. And thank you to all of our panelists on this topic. Fantastic conversation happening in the chat as well. It's hard to keep up with all these wonderful comments, so I appreciate that. We are a bit over time, but we do want to give everyone a chance to have a break, stretch break. So, Holli, what do you say?
Let's make this one 10 minutes. Let's come back at 20 till. And that'll put us 10 minutes behind our schedule, but pretty close. Does that work?
That sounds good. Thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you back in 10 minutes.
Our second panel is Developing Community Allies with Cynthia Cebuhar, MDiv, co-director of the Temple of the Creative Flame in Arizona, and resident clergy for Interfaith and Earth Traditions for the Shrine of Holy Wisdom. Cedar Monroe, MDiv, co-founder of Chaplains on the Harbor for people experiencing homelessness, incarceration, and addiction, and of Harbor Roots Farm. Candace Kant, PhD, retired professor, hi Candace, of history and women's studies, and former academic dean of Cherry Hill Seminary. And Margo Wolfe, whose bio just came in this morning. Let's see. Margo, I'm going to have to let you say what your intro said, if you don't mind. She is our current academic dean. Go for it.
So as Holli says, I'm the current academic dean. I also serve on the Council of Nine in the Sisterhood of Avalon as the guardian matron.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for being here today. And I'm going to jump in with the first question. What have you and your groups gained from your community partnerships? Now, we didn't define community partnerships here. Are we talking pagan only or the wider community? Well, I think both, but in this case, we really want to hear more about connecting with the wider community because those are allies that some of us have found very useful. So who would like to jump in first? Candace, we haven't heard from you yet this morning. Would you like to take this question first? And be sure to unmute yourself.
I believe I'm unmuted now.
Okay, good.
One of the things that I feel that I've gained and we've gained, my group has gained, is just these wonderful experiences we've had with people. I've been invited to their services or rituals or whatever, and they've come and visited mine, and it's really so rewarding to be able to communicate across these lines. And I've met some wonderful people that I just cherish and really good friends. Absolutely. A lot of my work with community allies has been through our Interfaith Council that I've been on for well over 20 years now. And it was quite challenging at first because I think I was one of the first pagans or witches they had. And some of the questions were a bit off-putting. But as time goes on, they got to know me as a person and realized that I didn't do these horrible things that Hollywood says that I do. And have become very, very good and close friends with me. So I think the experiences and the friendship is what I've gained from with community allies.
Hey, thank you. Margo.
Sure. So I've had a couple chances to engage with the wider community, most of which has been a liberal Christian tradition. What I have gained from these, what I've gained, what my groups have gained that I have belonged to, is a better sense of understanding each other. Honestly, that you know, what Candace says, you know, there's a lot of misconceptions floating around. People don't know, they don't understand, and just bringing up the topic of, you know, what is your religious tradition? You say I'm pagan, and after there's some uncomfortableness often with me going, did I reveal too much? And on the other side going, is this a joke? And then saying, no, it's not, has opened up those doors for talking to each other and getting a better understanding of what we're trying to do, and realizing that what we're trying to do is mostly the same thing. We're trying to help the wider community. And that's where the partnerships begin to develop and grow, as we say, okay, well, what is it that we want to do? And I live in a very impoverished area. Actually, my zip code is considered the most impoverished zip code in the United States. We've got a lot of issues. Environmental is one of them. So being able to talk to and work out a process with, say, the Benedictine sisters, and say, what is it that we want to make happen in terms of our city? How can we clean up our lake? How can we clean up our communities in terms of trash and blight and things like that? So after we get past that initial uncomfortableness of recognizing who we are and what our beliefs are, we go back to what is it that we want to do. And that's where our conversations begin to really develop and lie, and we get to do some work together.
Thank you. Cedar.
I think my experience also, like Margo, has been working a lot around issues of poverty and the issues like that face poor communities here in Washington State. And I think organizing around justice issues has been a really important way, I think a really important way to bring different religious communities together. When I did work at Chaplains, you know, we worked with all sorts of groups from, you know, progressive churches, not really very many conservative churches. I was too queer for that. And but you know, across all sorts of different, there was a Buddhist community, the local pagan communities, you know, and also working alongside indigenous tribal communities and indigenous nations in the region. Like this, it was a great way. I mean, issues around justice, you know, whether those are environmental, poverty, all of the things that are really, you know, all the crises that are facing our communities right now. I think it's a really good way to bring people together, right? All faith traditions have something to say about issues of justice and issues of how people should be treated and how the land should be treated. And so one of the primary ways, and that I continue to be involved in that work, is through my work with the Poor People's Campaign and kind of different spin-offs from that, including like University of the Poor. And so, you know, the Poor People's Campaign also has a core group of religious leaders. I think it strives to be interfaith. The co-chairs are both Christian, and I'm one of the very few pagans involved. But it is a space, I think, where there's more and more conversation, and I'm able to have more and more conversation around the ways that we can draw in different faith communities around issues of justice. So, I mean, I think that that's a really important way to build community partnerships, and I think that that's a kind of forum where a lot of different religious groups come together.
Thank you, Cedar. Cynthia, you've been doing this for a while.
Yes, I have. I had jotted down some answers to some of the questions. My best experiences are when allies showing genuine curiosity. Some of you have spoken to that, and respect for our practices and beliefs. You know, it's a two-way street. We participate together with solstice celebrations and community service, like Cedar spoke about. And my worst experiences, allies again imposing their beliefs and assumptions. Oh, assumptions really get me. I don't like that. So that can cause me some tension. And I just feel my inner down girl going, just settle down, you know. And that's difficult sometimes to sit through. But it's, and then moments when our practices are misrepresented, that's another biggie for me. And overcoming challenges through open communication and the willingness to listen and learn from each other is the thing that comes up for me the most. Yeah, it's being present, giving voice to what I believe, and not being afraid in these interspace spaces, especially if I've been invited. You know, the fear goes down because there's a welcoming type of environment that is easy for me to navigate. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we want this to be not just a philosophical, but a practical conversation, so that people maybe have some ideas they can take away today for what they might do in their community. So I wonder if you might share, what are some of your best experience with non-pagan community allies? Margo, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. I think when those doors have been opened and the conversations have already started, and then there's a reaching out. So I'll give an example of one particular situation. Is there is an organization that works with a very diverse community with their counseling services, and they really try to integrate everyone's spirituality or people's spirituality within the counseling arena, so that they can allow each person who is within the center feel comfortable and allowing their faith practices, or if they don't have any particular faith practices, or they wish to not have any. So a couple of years ago, my group was invited in to help with giving, I wouldn't say necessarily pagans, but maybe people who were nature-based focused or wanted to be focused in a way. And they said, well, can you do help opening up the center for us? Can you put together a short ceremony practice to invite people in? But it was a way of also it was asked in a way that was like, oh, we want to have this special thing that no one's ever seen before. And I did not feel like we were being used as a token or anything like that. It was really more of it was a very honest invitation to say, we want this is part of our community. So we've been doing that for the last couple of years. First it was the opening of the space, but then it was also different times of the year, different. We would do the summer solstice celebration, winter solstice. In particular, those two ones, very, very general services. But what it did was it gave those people there that might not have had a home for their feelings, their ideas, their beliefs, and it normalized it without bringing it to the forefront and saying, look at what we have brought. We have what these wonderful pagans to show everyone how diverse and accepting we are. And that wasn't it at all. It was very much here's something that we want to invite in our space, this type of energy. And it was holistic, and it was beautiful, it was organic, and it has continued to be that way. And I think it harkens back on my reality that when people ask me what my beliefs are, and if I'm in that space where I feel comfortable to tell them, because sometimes I'm not, sometimes as a lot of people, we have to kind of gauge whether this is a safe space to reveal that information. That I talk to people, say, oh yes, I'm pagan, and I say it in a way that almost sounds like if I could say, yes, I'm Methodist, I'm Presbyterian, I'm Catholic, in a way that normalized it the way I said it, so that I didn't feel like I was on defensive. And that broke down one of those barriers to begin with. And I think that's what this counseling organization was trying to do as well. So that is some of my favorite experiences in terms of working with outside communities and multiple religious and faith-based groups of people.
Okay, thank you. I've lost track of where I started now, so who would like to jump in next on the same question, your best experiences? Candace?
I guess I can jump in a little bit. It just the question made me think of so many things that have happened to me. One of the first things I thought of was an experience in the prison system, as I volunteered out there, and at High Desert Correctional Center, which is a high security prison. And the prison chaplain was a Catholic priest, Father Dave. We were going to do a ritual, and a pomegranate for the ritual. We can't bring a pomegranate into the prison. So we asked Father Dave, he says, oh, don't worry, I'll get you a pomegranate. So he went to 3 different grocery stores. I don't think he knew what a pomegranate was. And he eventually came up with a kiwi for us. So we said, well, it'll make do. But this vision in my head of this Catholic priest running around to 3 grocery stores looking for a pomegranate for the pagans was just priceless to me. And I've said I'm on the Interfaith Council here. Some of the women on the Interfaith Council decided that we should have a women's group, and I was volunteered to join. And I showed up late. They're going to do an afternoon tea. It's kind of a get together, get to know you thing, and have tea and crumpets. And I came late to a meeting and found out I had been volunteered to do the opening ritual. So, which I thought, I mean, these are some, mainstream Abrahamic religions that have turned to the pagan now to do their opening ritual. But I got a real surprise there too, because, okay, I came up with a ritual. We're going to call directions, but they're kind of, no deities are mentioned. We're just talking directions, elements. And then I said, well, we'll have a self-blessing. And one of them said, self-blessing, what is that? I said, well, you just take a little time out to appreciate yourself. So, oh no, you don't know, blessings only come from God. You can't do a self-blessing. That I was so surprised. So I had to do a little explanation of what a self-blessing is. Of course, the Interfaith Committee does panels every November. We have a series of panels of various questions, and I'm usually on them. The Christians get to be on each panel. As a pagan, I only get to be on one. But they kind of seem to like my outlook on things. They always make me go first because I'm the oldest religion. And I found out that, I do my thing and then everybody else gets up and, oh, we do that too. Me too, me too, me too. And I'm like, no, you don't. But it's been a very interesting experience. And coming out of the Interfaith Council, I got to know a person who's a friend, Katie, and she's with the Center for Spiritual Living, which is religious science, which is also a non-mainstream religion. But they invited me to come and do a summer solstice ritual for them at their new facility. And it was absolutely lovely. We had about 30 people there. the mechanics of doing it were, you know, because we do libation, hand out cups, pour a little liquid, something to eat. And I tried to get healthy stuff to eat, although my preference is to get sweet cookies, but that doesn't work for everybody. But it was just a great experience, and they seemed to really enjoy it. And certainly I got a lot of nice compliments when it was over. So I'm not sure if that, I just had to give you some of my recollections and reminiscences of my experience in an interfaith setting.
Yeah, thank you. Cedar, I think you're next. Am I right?
I'll go next at anyone. I think one of my best experiences recently, I've had lots of good experiences, but one of the things that I really enjoyed recently is I worked with a Christian Indigenous Studies program at Vancouver School of Theology in Vancouver, Canada, to come up with and brainstorm ways that the pagan community could interact and have conversation around issues of settler colonialism, and build relationships with Indigenous peoples and Indigenous nations here in North America. And that was a really it was a really profound time for me, and it was really useful for me to have those conversations. I think a really central part of my own pagan identity and my own paganism is connecting with the land. And here in the US, it feels really important to me as a non-Indigenous person to figure out ways to connect respectfully, not just with the land, but with the people who have stewarded this land and cared for it and to whom it belongs, and to find ways to be invested in supporting Indigenous sovereignty. And so both this class and other relationships that I have built over the years with Indigenous communities have allowed me to build relationships through going to powwows and going to tribal canoe journeys, especially here in Washington State, and learn from Indigenous elders and Indigenous people here. But that time of being able to really kind of synthesize what I've learned in those different spaces, and to learn from the Indigenous leaders leading that particular study program, around just ways that both for myself as a pagan, how to respectfully connect, but also just thinking about ways that the pagan communities in the US in general can build those relationships. That has been one of my best recent experiences of having community partnership.
Okay, great. I know I'm the moderator for this one, but I think I'm going to jump in just for a minute and share a few things that I've done, because it might get some wheels turning and remind us of some other things. I'm on an FBI community advisory committee, have been for more than 10 years. And yeah, I'm definitely a squeaky wheel there. And I just kind of figure that's why I'm here. I'm on a ministerial group against the death penalty, and we have occasional actions here. I am on an advisory group for our state coalition of sexual assault and domestic violence services. And for example, something that happened with them this year, they got a grant to throw a big statewide training thing. It was pretty cool. And the person in charge called me to get my advice. She said, we're trying to be proactive and work on prevention, not just intervention and treatment. And we understand that a lot of the problems come through religions. And she said, I know, not yours, which was kind of nice to hear. But she said, I was hoping that with your interfaith background, you could help direct me to some people. Well, we got there, and there were like a dozen big tables with all the people I had recommended. There was what she called a faith rep, I think, at each table. And people stood up at the end and said, I had no idea we had this many religions in South Carolina. I had no idea some of these religions existed. That was really cool. What else? Oh, I'm on a school district like community group. And again, I don't push the pagan stuff all that often, but I'm real clear about my identity. That's a minister's group too. And I make sure that they know I'm there. And occasionally the staff do call me for help with something. So I'm thinking that probably every one of us in this room volunteers or is a donor or has some connection with some kind of group where you need each other. And that's some of what I'm looking for, is not just that they need us, so they recognize us, but how do we become allies to help each other? So going on, can you explain maybe one of your worst experiences and what you've learned from it? Do you want to start with that one, Cedar? I'll go backwards after that.
Sure. Well, I mean, so one of the things for me, one of the things I've enjoyed the most in my work is doing chaplaincy in jail and prisons. And there was a conversation kind of during the break around that. So I know that there's a number of you all who do that. Rory, I know you're here in Washington State. So I want to preface this by saying, like, some of the best experiences of both community partnerships and just working doing this work has been in jail and prison settings, but also some of the harder ones as well. In Washington State, a lot of I come from a really poor white community, so Aberdeen on the coast kind of was the center when I was younger of white gangs, and so I worked a lot with young white men who were identified as pagan, as heathen, and were very influenced by the Asatru folk assembly, particularly in this region. And AFA provides a lot of support for people who are coming in and out of jail. And it's also kind of a growing force, particularly in my community of origin, and in a lot of poor white communities across the country. It's an explicitly kind of white nationalist group with a heathen identity, and it became, at least in the jail and prison settings that I worked in, it was kind of a center for white power organizing as well. It kind of became kind of the center of that. And so a lot of my work in jails in prison ended up being around working with young men who identified as heathen, and working with them to try to find other ways for them to practice or find alternative materials for inclusive heathenry, to kind of have conversations with them, challenge kind of the white nationalist perspectives they were bringing. The thing is a lot of young people, a lot of people join gangs right in prison to survive, but also so while also recognizing that, also trying to find ways for these people to find other ways to express their faith, to realize that there were inclusive versions of heathenry that were not explicitly white supremacist. I mean, obviously, probably even maybe the majority, but had a lot of conversation around that. And also, I see somebody as a Troth member here. I used a lot of materials that were put out there, but I think that that's one thing that American paganism is addressing, and I think a lot of people are trying to address, is the ways that various forms of paganism, Norse and Druidry as well, are used kind of towards a white nationalist end game. And anyway, that's something that I was very aware of and did a lot of organizing around, and a lot of education around. So both a good and worst experience, I suppose, in some ways. But yeah.
Thank you. Cynthia?
Some of my worst experiences have been being excluded from religious expos, barriers being put up about opening prayers at the local city council. that type of thing. We've gone to court and have had rulings favorable for us. And so those types of things, it's intimidation, you know, and it's trying to get us to be silenced. And we're here. We're old. A lot of us are physically old, but we were here. Our beliefs are rooted in the earth, and that's what's common to all of us. And once that kind of idea gets out there, we're invited now. I'm a member of the Arizona Interfaith Movement, and we take turns with our opening invocations. And I always have us take a deep breath before we begin. And then I open discussing the divine, however that may be defined for you. And people will say, yeah, because we have Buddhists there, we have Hindu people, all sorts of faiths traditions are represented. And then at an expo in Mesa, one of the cities here, heavily Mormon country, and our table for information was placed between two Christian ministers. And once we started speaking with folks, Pastor Rock on one side of me told me, oh, my grandmother was a witch. I inherited all of her books and papers. And I said, oh, where have you read them? He said, oh, yeah, I've read through them. They're on my bookshelf. And then it occurred to me, I said, do you have her photo there? He said, oh, yeah. I said, oh, so you have an ancestral shrine. And it's like, yeah, I guess I do. And so it was those types of encounters, it can be good or bad, but it's gratifying when it's a positive encounter. And I wanted to say something to Candace. When people had said, well, you can't bless people. I have had that same type of encounter, but I say people, well, when someone sneezes, do you say bless you? Well, yeah.
Good point.
You're blessing them. You know, you didn't wait for the minister to show up and bless them because they sneezed. And so that's kind of something I do to turn situations around and help people to see the truth from my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. I'll use that.
Candace, have I called on you for your worst experience yet? And
not yet. But Cynthia pretty much explained, took the words out of my mouth, let's say. Yeah, it's been on the council, and you have to have a lot of patience when you're dealing with people, because especially those from the Abrahamic religions, they have blinders on, and they kind of don't see outside those blinders. And sometimes you want to just heave a sigh or make some sarcastic comment to it. And I tell myself, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Just yeah. And they do make you feel like an outsider sometimes. Yes. We've had something here called the Mayor's Prayer Breakfast, which they have the various mayors from the various suburbs of Las Vegas. And they ask us all to submit an opening prayer, and a mayor would give it. And I kept submitting a pagan prayer, but it was never selected by a mayor. And I asked about that. And of course, it would be politically dangerous for a mayor who is an elected individual to be giving a pagan prayer. Well, interestingly enough, the Freedom from Religion Foundation complained about the mayor's prayer breakfast as an inappropriate combination of church and state. And so the mayor's prayer breakfast no longer exists here. They've transformed it to something else, which is kind of sad because I always got a free breakfast, and the breakfasts were pretty good. But on our Interfaith Council itself, they always start with an opening prayer. And I have, in over 20 years, I have never been asked to give the opening prayer. So yeah, there are experiences like that. You have to have patience, and a sense of humor helps too.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Margo?
I probably will echo a lot of the experiences that the panelists had. I have been identifying myself as a pagan since I was 15 years old. I am 53 now, so there's some math involved with that. But my experiences have changed, or at least how I've responded to them. There's been a lot of dismissal, especially when I was younger, dismissing like this is just a phase. It doesn't, uh, you'll come back to the fold. And I didn't grow up with a particularly strong religious background. I grew up Presbyterian and was pretty relaxed in that regard. But anytime I would say something about, I would like to contribute a prayer or an offering, or contribute to the discussion about different religious identities, and just dismissed, pushed aside. That's not real. That doesn't make, that's just something silly. And I know as my group that I belong to, the Sisterhood of Avalon, we've encountered that when we've traveled in different areas. We do a lot of traveling abroad and working with different areas of the UK in terms of our faith practices. So sometimes we have to tread lightly because we know that certain areas will be not necessarily antagonistic, but certainly very, worried and questioning what is it that you're doing. So my encounters have been mostly in that regard, and how I respond is different. When I was younger, I was hothead and I would just go after them. Now I'm what Candace has said, practicing more patience, or at least trying to. Still a little bit of a hothead. But that whole coming to this is who I am, this is what I do, and I would love to have a conversation with you about it. And that's becoming more and more met with okay, let's sit down and talk. So those experiences are becoming fewer and far between, which is encouraging. One of the things I did want to say is one of my worst experiences with a multi-religious community has actually been within our pagan community at home. We had a huge pagan community. We would have Pagan Pride Day. 400 plus people would show up in a small town of in Pennsylvania. That was a huge accomplishment. 9 different groups practiced within that community, all different traditions and practices. And we found a way to really make it work. It was amazing. It was beautiful. We respected each other's viewpoints and how we wanted to do it. We did service work together as well. And then we tried to find ways to reach out to the broader religious community, particularly the Christian community. And now with the Jewish community that we have, small Jewish community that we have, is much more open to discussions and doing things together. But we had a group of people who came into that pagan community after it had been established. We welcomed them, loved them, had them participate, and they sowed a lot of seeds of discontent and antagonistic resentment. And I'm not exactly sure where it came from, but it did create a lot of problems when we would come together. That happened, I want to say 15 years ago, and we still haven't recovered from it. So while I look at my experiences with the non-pagan communities as sometimes a little bit, I don't want to say the word frightening, but I do work for a Catholic institution, so I do have to be aware of what I say and who I talk to. But more and more people seem to be open to conversations and working together. And so I've been made aware of in these situations that it's not just about the people whose practices are vastly different from my own, or who don't understand that even paganism exists, but it's also sometimes within my own community that we have to build those bridges and maintain those bridges and recognize that our missions might not align. And if that's the way it is, how can we still find ways to work together, coexist, or at least not create problems for each other.
Thank you. I'm going to jump in again. You can tell I love this topic. I forgot to say that I've been a liaison for close to 20 years with the Sheriff's Department, which is pretty large here. And there was a time when their person assigned to me just showed up out of the blue at an event because he saw a post online and he was afraid somebody was going to make trouble. So I could give other stories, but I feel like even though that sheriff is a member of the giant First Baptist Church here, I know he's got my back, and we're friends. Another group that I'm connected with is victim advocates. So I keep mentioning these things because I want everybody to think about how we benefit from these alliances. It's not just a feel-good thing. Cynthia, I was hoping that you might share about how you got involved with Pagan Pride where you are, because I loved your story. Would you mind sharing about that?
Well, I have lots of stories. I'm not too sure. What I did was I moved to the area and I was looking for community and I saw Pagan Pride just pop up. I don't know where I saw it, but I called and they were reorganizing the whole committee. So I went to the first meeting and got voluntold that the workshop coordinator position could really use my expertise, which I didn't have expertise in, but now I do. Thank you, Phoenix Pagan Pride. So that's how I just got involved that way.
You told me about how you just went out and you just started going
yeah,
to see.
They had this small group of people, the same people came. And I thought, oh my gosh, it just seemed boring to me. So I reached out and however many contacts I could online, someone knowing someone, I went through the religious studies department at ASU and got some really good contacts of various traditions and invited them to do workshops. You could speak for 30 minutes, just come and be with us. And there's a Chaos Magicians group in the math department at ASU. They showed up. The smaller traditions were there. We had several indigenous groups show up. They had never been invited, and it was based on the earth and things like that. Members of the Jewish community who practice earth-based things, they showed up. That sort of thing it just expanded. And the best year of attendance that we had just before the pandemic, it went from 700 or 800 the year before. It was 2,000 community people showed up. And having conversations with the local police who were kind enough to donate their services. Usually they are paid, and they showed up for free for us. And it was wonderful having them do that of their own time. A few of them are pagan, and it was wonderful having those conversations. We reached out to Luke Air Force Base, and some of those folks showed up. So it's having people show up and being present. And if someone didn't want to do it, I said, okay, next. And so people began to call us saying, can we do a workshop on? And that expanded. And it's been a really good thing, Of course, there were protesters on the boundaries, but that's okay. They have a right to give voice to their beliefs, but they didn't interrupt us. And we had large public ritual right there on the front lawn of the event space. And people from the neighborhood kind of came around and they were, oh, this is interesting. And so it's been good. But it's being present and not being afraid of having someone say no. okay, I'm a big girl. I'm okay. I've been told lots of times in my life. And so now those resources know each other. And there's a lot of intertradition cooperation for various things that are done for the common good here in Phoenix. So all of that has been wonderful. I think that's what you were referencing, Holly.
Yeah, it is. Thank you. So you've both told us how you did it and what the benefit was. Cedar, I know that you've done this sort of thing. Could you share what has worked for you and maybe what hasn't worked in developing allies, for example, for your projects, for your ministries?
Well, I think everything. I think that it's really important for me to build these kinds of alliances because we're facing a lot of we're facing a lot of crises in our time and a lot of and it requires our communities to come together across all kinds of difference, including religious difference. I think I think I'm going to just go back to, because I'm thinking about it right now, go back to work that I've done with the Poor People's Campaign and like associated groups, just being able to be in the room with people across all sorts of different lines of division, right? All across across race, across religion, across the rural urban divide, across all of the we're in a we're in a reality in the United States where we're divided in all sorts of different ways, and we're in a political climate where people are kind of pitted against each other in all sorts of very specific ways, but that is really deeply rooted in our history. And the more we can come together around the issues that are actually facing our communities, around issues of poverty, around our climate crisis, around racism, around all of the hatred directed towards queer and trans communities, I think the more powerful we will be. And certainly, obviously, we're going to, always going to get backlash for that. I think probably one of the worst experiences I had is, most of my work has been done in a small town. And we did an event across religion and multiple other. A lot of us were homeless. A lot of us were experiencing a lot of different things. But during 2020, we did a event for Black Lives Matter in Aberdeen, and we're met with protesters with guns threatening to shoot us. So that probably was my worst experience with that kind of organizing, right? But also even that, the way that alliances were built in the community and the way that we were able to have conversation around and after that event was a huge catalyst in the community to talk about issues of racism that really needed to be addressed. And so, I think as for me, the most important part of community partnerships is addressing those major challenges that face our community and being able to come together. So, yeah.
Thank you. Candace, did you want to share anything here?
What was the question again?
What works, what doesn't work for you?
Well, what works is keeping an open mind and being, willing to listen to people and to accept them as they are and as they present themselves. What doesn't work is getting upset and irritated and throwing a temper tantrum. Although I haven't done that, but I don't think it would be at all profitable or helpful. I was thinking of something that happened some years ago. We had these before COVID, we had these monthly meetings of the interfaith, but they were open to everybody, not just the council. And where we would talk about a particular topic or theme. And I went to one, and there was a fellow there that, I kind of looked at him and I thought, oh, he's a conservative, very conservative Christian, maybe a fundamentalist. And as the conversation went on and he jumped in, he was a Buddhist. And I thought, okay, Candace, you need to stop judging people by their appearances. You need to listen to what they say and come to them where they are. He was a very nice gentleman, by the way.
Thank you. And Margo, have I given you a chance in this one?
Oh, not yet, but I wanted to piggyback on what Candace just said is, it's very easy to make assumptions, especially if you've been verbally, physically attacked or intimidated in the past. So we make those assumptions that, this person doesn't know what paganism is. They're going to cause problems. I know that, in the past, I've been threatened with my child being taken away from me because of my religious beliefs. So it can, you got that trauma response. So overcoming that and being able to say, okay, I'm going to listen to this person or these people and say, let's have this conversation and let me give you the information that I can that might help you make a better decision about who I am, and I can make a better decision about who you are. But in addition to that is beyond conversations, and Lisa mentioned this in the chat, is showing up, finding those instances where you can be of help to your community, the wider community, and showing them who you are, not just telling them who you are, but showing that. And a lot of times you show them first, and then they ask you questions about, well, where did you come from? What church are you from? How did you learn about this event, and so forth. And then what you've done in partnership with them a lot of times makes much more of a positive impact on your relationship with them. I was very lucky to work with several different groups that in my community that assisted with the LGBTQ population. One of them is a Christian church, and just sitting down and working on issues that help young people, and then finding out who I am or what my religious beliefs were. And it didn't even matter at that point anymore. It didn't matter, which god or goddess or I spoke to, what my practices were, anything like that. It was, okay, you have a lot of similar ideas and missions, and we want to partner with you and your groups and continue to do this work. And so that's what I've seen has helped for me, as someone who tends to be pretty outspoken and sometimes loud, that not speaking and just doing it in tandem with them. And I love working with the not only the Christian church down the street that I've been working with, but also that, as mentioned, the Benedictine sisters on their earth-based initiatives. It's been a fantastic experience. And as I said, I work at a Catholic university, working with the service organizations there. And then people finding out when I feel comfortable, then they go, oh, well, what church do you go to? Well, this is my practice. Oh, okay. And then it doesn't become an issue, and then we can have the conversations become a little bit more comfortable after that.
Thank you. I'd like to open up our last 10 minutes or so to some discussion. And Lisa Morgenstern, I saw that you had your hand up a while back, and you also posted some stuff about working on the Human Relations Hate Crimes Task Force and some of your community contacts. I wondered if you would be willing to share a little bit about that with the group and what your thoughts were.
Thanks. In 2002, we were doing a spring equinox ritual that was protested, and the police didn't come. So I went to the press because I was really angry. And I looked up the penal code, which at that time with a kind of a, I guess with a broad description as not a lawyer, it looked like it was a hate crime. So I went to the press, I wrote a letter to the editor, and then they wanted to do an article. And then when it was published on the front page of our local newspaper in the Antelope Valley, then the hate crimes task force came to me and said, hey, this is horrible, what happened to you? And it happened in the back parking lot of a shop that I helped at. And the shop had people come in. So the community kind of came together, not just pagans, but people who were, oh, I'm a Christian, but I don't think that's not right, what happened to you. So that was really nice. But I ended up going to a hate crimes task force meeting. One of the people that was at the ritual was a sheriff's chaplain volunteer. He actually held up a badge. So there was like all of this ideas that I was really uncomfortable because we called our police and they didn't come. And that's happened to me again, but attending our hate crimes task force meeting and then realizing that I could help there. So I attended the meetings until it was, it folded for various reasons. But being a part of the Human Relations Commission, there's one in Los Angeles. And if it wasn't about 75 miles and an hour and a half drive, I'd go down there. We're up in the mountains. So I got involved in the Antelope Valley Interfaith Council. I got involved in the Human Relations Hate Crimes Task Force. And then at that point, everybody in my house is loud. Hopefully you can't hear them. Everyone in my house is loud. Hopefully you can't hear them. It's just charming. I have a lot of people here. So we got involved, and then I started doing chaplaincy volunteer work at the prison because of my interfaith work, because the Interfaith Council wanted me to participate, and basically going to the meetings and doing the work, participating. When I wasn't working, I drove down to Los Angeles for some of the sheriff's events they have down there as well, because they do participate. So it's great to hear all the people that are doing the kind of work that I've been doing, for a long time. It's nice to hear how other people are doing it. But that's basically, but showing up is the biggest deal, and not being afraid to roll up your sleeves and help fold up the chairs afterwards at an event, because you end up meeting people and talking to you. But I found that participating in interfaith events, both as a speaker and just as a helper, helps me meet more people. And it's kind of interesting how many people come up to you after an interfaith event and say, really, that's how you practice? We do the same thing. Or I really like what you do. That really felt good to me, what you shared. And so you might think that standing up in a Christian church in front of a cross and doing a hammer hallowing as a heathen, because I'm dual trad, would be intimidating, but actually the president of the Interfaith Council asked me to open the event by consecrating it. So I consecrated a Methodist church. That was fun. Anyway, hopefully that answers your question, but I think showing up and not being afraid to do the grunt work helps people see you as a human and not as that weird, quirky person.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll throw in that I've gotten some really good training through the FBI, because they see, they say that they're there to hear us, and we make sure that they do listen. But what they're really, it's clear their agenda is to teach us, and that's fine. I've learned about what hate crimes are and a lot of other things that are helpful. I don't see hands up. We've got just a few more minutes. Oh, there's somebody. Maka, unmute yourself and
This is a slightly off topic, but I think it's relevant. And that is, I have noticed changes in my local interfaith community that I attribute to our participation. For instance, a lot of churches have removed the pews and put chairs and circles and space in the middle for people to move around and dance and stuff. A lot of churches have taken the altar down from the dais and put it in the middle of the room. I consider that our influence. I wondered if anyone else has noticed stuff like that.
Thank you. Cynthia, you have a response?
Sorry. Yes, I've noticed those types of things, moving the altars down into the people so that they're circling it, those types of things. And I did also want to encourage people that it's when you show up, you are doing public paganism. You don't have to proclaim it, by your very presence, you are publicly affirming what we are. And and sometimes several have mentioned, people will come up, they'll ask questions, that sort of thing. But we don't have to be a pagan apologist, but showing up is really good. It's a good way to present us. So.
Anybody go to lunches with people, invite somebody out for a drink?
Yeah.
Yeah. So just remember, some of this is just basic sandbox stuff. Does anybody else have a question for the panelists? Or any last comments from those of you on the panel?
I have what might be considered a controversial way of interacting. We have, I run a literary festival in my town as well, and we give away approximately 400, 600 books to children, along with a whole bunch of other activities and so forth. So lots of different things. And what I did last year was I put a lot of books from the banned book list from the different parts of the country, the United States, that were considered controversial, and some of them were absolutely ridiculous. One was a board book about curls and the texture of young girls' hair, young girls of color. And it's a beautiful book, it's gorgeous, but that was considered controversial. So I made sure that the table was filled with a whole bunch of different, what was considered controversial books. And I certainly didn't want to include a lot of books about religion, which is where this was that line that I was treading. But I did buy a couple of these books to put them out as a way to normalize, I guess it's not the right word I want to use, but to let people know that, this is a thought process, and you're trying to overcome some of those misconceptions. And one of them is my new favorite. It's called, and I'm not trying to promote these books, it's not this is not mine. One of the books I bought was What Witches Wear. And it's just a book of it's a picture book, and it talks about what witches wear. And sometimes witches wear pink because they're dancing, and sometimes they wear a white lab coat, and sometimes they wear a sweater because they're a librarian, and sometimes they wear gardening gloves because they work in the garden. And what it did was, while it could be considered that treading that line of trying to proselytize some belief systems, it's also saying, look, we're not what Hollywood says we are. We're not trying to steal your children. We're not trying to indoctrinate you and tell you to worship the devil. We just want you to know that we're just like everyone else. So that's one of the things that I did, kind of like, I just left a couple of the books on the table. I think 2 of them were taken. And I think it also gave people in our community a chance that I knew who were pagan, to see themselves represented on that table of books.
Thank you. Maka, is this, I see your hand is up, or is that from before?
No, it's not from before.
Okay.
It's a general question, because I think a lot of people have mentioned volunteering in prisons. And one of the things that we're trying to do, I find prisons to be very, they're very Byzantine organizations, departments of corrections, and we have real trouble getting access to the right chaplain or the right person within a particular prison system. If you can help us with any of them, we would really like your help, because we get queries from inmates and we can't get back to them because we don't know who it's going to go through and get destroyed or whatever, and we need to find the chaplains are the right people. So if you can help us with that, you can contact either me or you can contact through Hematite Inmate Ministry, which has been put here a couple times, the link, pagancommons.org/hematite. We would like to find out, because we're trying to do it on our own, and it's like a huge research project that's not very rewarding so far, because we're not getting anywhere.
Thank you. Thank you for what y'all are doing too. Cynthia has a question, Maka. Is there an organization?
Hematite Inmate Ministries. Yeah, it's not official, but
and Rory just published.
There it is.
Posted the link. Okay. By the way, Cynthia, I got contacted late yesterday by somebody at the prison in Florence. In case you want me to share it with you. Oh, I think I did. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we meet once a month for an hour online. We'd love to have your participation. Rory can tell you some stuff. He's the one who's employed by the State Department of Corrections.
It is the time that we had planned for our lunch break. So I want to let people go, and we will restart at 1:45. However, anybody who wants to stay in here, talk, chat, all you want to, we're not closing down the room. We'll just stop the recording here.